He smiled the day he came home. The same cracked smile he wore the night everything burned. What if the place you ran from was the only one still waiting for you? What if redemption arrived long after forgiveness had turned to ash? Ethan had forgotten how the ocean smelled. Damp wood, salt, and loss. The town hadn't forgotten him. Windows shuddered when he passed. Every wave that crashed against the pier whispered his name like a ghost, refusing to rest. Across the street stood the cafe he once helped build, still alive, still warm, still owned by the woman whose heart he'd broken in firelight. As rain thickened, he pulled his jacket tighter, unaware that his second chance had already begun, and that it would cost him more than he had left to give. The cafe clock ticked louder than the storm. Grace hadn't seen his face in 9 years, yet the ache was immediate. Old grief awakened like a bruise pressed too soon. Michael asked who the stranger was, but she couldn't answer. Some ghosts deserve silence. Outside, Ethan lingered by the pier, staring at the endless water that once reflected firelight and screams. He had come home for reasons he barely understood. Maybe to face what was left, maybe to say goodbye properly this time. Ethan's boots left muddy prints on the wooden pier. He leaned over the railing, watching waves erase each trace of him. The sea didn't forgive, it only kept secrets. He thought of his son. The laughter, the fire, the night he couldn't save him. Guilt was a tide that never receded. Across town, Jack Harper, the retired fire chief, saw the news of Ethan's return through gossip whispered over coffee. His jaw tight. Some wounds never heal, he told himself. But deep down, he knew the fire had burned more than homes. It had burned the truth had buried. That night, the storm broke. Lightning flashed across the water as Ethan sat beneath the pier, staring at his trembling hands. Every scar told the story of one he couldn't save. Yet, for the first time in years, he whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Somewhere above, Grace closed her eyes and did the same, both reaching for peace that neither believed they deserved. The town hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, but by morning, everyone knew Ethan Cole was back. He walked the coastline quietly, a shadow of the man they remembered. Grace avoided the pier, yet every sound of wind against the cafe door made her flinch. Some said he'd gone mad. Others said he came to make peace with ghosts. Ethan didn't care what they believed. He only knew he was tired of running from the sea, the fire, and himself. Grace tried to lose herself in routine. Brewing coffee, wiping counters, pretending the tremor in her hands was just from the cold. But memory doesn't fade when the person who broke it walks by your window every morning. She wondered if he remembered her laugh before it turned into a scream that night. Some part of her wished he didn't. Work found him by accident. A dock worker recognized him and offered a day's labor hauling nets. Ethan accepted, wordless, grateful for the ache in his muscles that drowned out thought. By evening, he sat alone at the pier's edge, pockets empty, but hands steady. A rare victory for a man who'd forgotten what peace felt like. That night, as rain softened into mist, Ethan found a stray dog huddled beneath a bench, ribs showing, eyes too tired to bark. He shared half a sandwich and sat beside it. No words, no pity, just two broken things learning how to breathe in the same silence. For the first time in years, he smiled without pain. Grace saw him again, this time with the dog. Something in the way he knelt to tie its makeshift leash made her chest tighten. She didn't see guilt. She saw a man trying to be kind to anything that would let him. Maybe forgiveness didn't begin with words. Maybe it began with the smallest act of care when no one was watching. Whispers travel faster than forgiveness in a small town. By now, everyone knew Ethan Cole was back, and that Grace Bennett had seen him. The air grew heavier with memory each time he passed Main Street. He wasn't looking for trouble, but guilt has a way of finding you even when you're quiet. Still, he stayed. For once, he didn't run. Maybe he was waiting for her to speak first. Grace didn't want to see him, yet she couldn't stop. Each glance through the cafe window was a quiet battle. She remembered the sound of her husband's laugh, and the silence that replaced it. The fire had taken her everything, and standing there was the man who'd carried her from the smoke, but not her husband. Her heart didn't know if it owed him gratitude or hatred. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by the pier with the dog again. The town's fire siren, long silent, wailed suddenly during a safety test. The sound tore through him like a blade. He froze, mid-step, eyes distant, memories flooding back, the smoke, the screams, the child he couldn't reach. The dog whimpered. The past wasn't done with him yet. Later, she found him outside the cafe, drenched and shivering. Grace almost walked past, but something in his eyes stopped her. They weren't the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a man who'd already punished himself more than she ever could. Still, the words came out sharp. "Why come back, Ethan? Haven't you done enough?" He looked up, rain dripping from his hair. "I thought maybe it was time." The confrontation lingered in both of them long after the rain stopped. Grace locked the cafe doors early and sat alone inside, heart racing. Ethan walked the empty street, the dog trailing behind. For the first time in years, the truth of that night stood between them again, and neither knew what forgiveness would cost. Days passed in quiet rhythm, Ethan working the docks, Grace serving coffee, both pretending not to see the other. But peace has sharp edges. One evening, Michael lingered on the pier too long, the tide swelling fast beneath the darkening sky. Ethan saw the boy's silhouette stumble on the slick boards. Instinct took over before thought. Some fires burn in the soul forever, and sometimes they flared just in time to save another. The scream that tore from Grace's throat was the same one that haunted her dreams. She ran toward the pier, heart pounding, fearing the worst. When she arrived, Ethan was kneeling in the rain, clutching her trembling son. No fire this time, only water and shock. Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, the air between them wasn't filled with anger, but with fragile, wordless gratitude. That night, Grace brought them both inside. The cafe smelled of salt and coffee as Ethan wrapped a towel around Michael's shoulders. Grace didn't thank him aloud. She didn't need to. The quiet between them said enough. For the first time since the fire, the warmth in that small cafe wasn't only from the stove. It was from forgiveness beginning to take shape. Later, when the boy was asleep in the back room, Grace poured Ethan a cup of coffee. They sat across from each other, the silence soft but full. She finally asked the question that had burned in her for years. "Why didn't you save him?" Ethan's voice cracked. "I tried. I swear I tried." The truth, raw and trembling, filled the air, and for once, neither of them looked away. When he finally left that night, the rain had stopped. Grace watched him walk down the empty street, shoulders low but lighter somehow. Forgiveness wasn't a gift. It was a wound that learned how to heal. In the reflection of the cafe glass, she saw herself smiling softly for the first time in years. She didn't know where this fragile peace would lead, but she knew it had begun. Summer came uneasy that year. The air grew dry, the wind restless, the kind of stillness that warned of something coming. On the ridge beyond town, smoke began to rise one morning, faint but sure. Ethan smelled it before anyone spoke. He'd spent years running from fire, and now it had found him again. Some chances, he thought, don't come to comfort you. They come to test if you've truly changed. By noon, the town buzzed with worry. Old fire alarms were tested, volunteers gathered, and Grace felt the same dread crawl up her spine. It was happening again. The scent of smoke, the hum of panic. When she saw Ethan among the volunteers, she froze. He wasn't the man who once failed her. He was the man standing ready to protect what was left. Jack Harper arrived late, but carried authority in his stride. The old fire chief had seen too much loss to ever relax at the scent of smoke. When his eyes met Ethan's, Time folded in on itself. Years of silence collapsing into one look. No words, no nod, just the weight of a shared memory neither could bear to name. But this time, Jack didn't send him away. By late afternoon, the fire had reached the outskirts of the forest. Flames snapped through dry grass like hungry memories. Ethan moved with focus, his breath steady, his mind locked on every shout and crackle. Grace watched from the cafe window, heart pounding. She'd lost one man to the fire before. She wasn't ready to lose another to redemption. As night fell, the fire turned wild. Ethan worked through exhaustion, each step heavier, each breath harder. The smoke tore his throat raw, but he didn't stop. In the chaos, he heard someone shout, trapped voices from a farmhouse up the hill. Without thinking, he ran toward them. The world behind him blurred into flame and wind. Redemption, it seemed, always demanded a price. The farmhouse groaned like a wounded animal, windows breathing flame, roof pitching under the weight of sparks. Ethan didn't wait for orders. He kicked through the back door and dropped low, counting heartbeats between coughs. The world narrowed to heat, popping timber, and the thin sound of someone crying in a pantry. He hauled a grandfather out first, then a girl with soot-streaked cheeks, guiding them beneath the smoke line, talking steady so panic had no room to bloom. Outside, hoses hammered the blaze, voices barked his name, and the night glowed the color of endings. He went back in again, because the math of guilt is simple. One more life, one more step, until there's nothing left to carry but the pain you came to pay down. The second pass was worse. Beams ticked above like a clock counting down. Ethan wrapped a wet cloth around his mouth, felt the heat crawl through his sleeves, and followed the sound of coughing to a collapsed hallway. A teenage boy lay pinned by rafters. Ethan levered wood with a grunt that tore something deep in his side. When the boy stood, he swayed, eyes wide with the shock of being alive. Ethan pressed the kid's hand to his shoulder and walked him out through a corridor of flame, each step a bargain with the building. Outside, cheers fractured into orders. Jack's voice cut through, steady and fierce, and for a breath the fire bent to human will. Ethan turned back again, because someone always screams after you think you're done. He heard the scream in the kitchen. Small, breathless, fading. A woman lay beneath a fallen cabinet, flames licking the curtains overhead. Ethan slid on his knees, jammed a pry bar, and lifted until the room blurred. Pain roared up his ribs, bright and absolute. He didn't stop. He dragged her free, shoved her toward the back stoop, and only then felt the floor buckle. The house announced its final decision with a thunder of nails. The ceiling gave way, and a beam struck his shoulder, driving him down. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet, the way quiet follows a bell. He tasted blood and smoke, thought of a boy laughing on a summer lawn, and chose to move anyway. Some deaths are paid in inches. They found him in the yard on his knees, coughing knives, refusing the stretcher until the last head count was finished. Jack crouched in front of him, eyes wet and angry, voice low enough to hide the tremor. "You stubborn fool," he said, and the words landed like something close to love. Sirens painted the fields red and blue. The sky, at last, began to darken from orange to honest black. Grace arrived breathless, Michael at her side, both faces pale and open. Ethan tried to stand, but the ground poured out from under him. He told them he was fine, because men like him always say it. Then his knees buckled, and the world slid left, and he folded into the arms that wouldn't let him fall. Dawn thinned the smoke into a weary veil. Crews stamped out the last embers. The ridge stopped glowing, and the town exhaled. They loaded Ethan into the ambulance, but somewhere between the field and the road he went gray, eyes rolling, breath skipping. Jack barked for space, for oxygen, for motion that beat the clock. Grace climbed in, fingers shaking as she pressed Ethan's unburned hand, whispering words she'd sworn never to give him. The doors slammed. Siren rose and the world funneled into that racing box of light. Later, when the fire lines cooled and the counts came back, someone asked where he'd gone. The answer was simple and terrible. He was alive, but already far away, swallowed by the road like a secret the town wasn't ready to lose again. Weeks passed. The town rebuilt fences, mended roofs, and whispered about the man who saved them. Grace visited the hospital miles away every few days, the road curling through fog like memory itself. Ethan was alive, though the fire had stolen pieces of him, his strength, his ease, his certainty. But when his eyes opened for the first time, and they found hers, he smiled. Not the old smile of denial, but one born of quiet survival. Some stories don't end in flames. They smolder, waiting to be rewritten in the light. When Ethan could finally walk again, Grace wheeled him out to the courtyard. The ocean wind carried the scent of salt and ash, but it no longer hurt. Michael ran ahead, laughing, tossing a stick for the dog Ethan had once rescued. For the first time in years, laughter didn't sound like an echo from the past. It sounded like a promise. Grace leaned against his shoulder, and Ethan, broken but breathing, whispered, "Maybe this is enough." Back in town, the cafe reopened with new paint and old memories. Ethan took a job fixing the docks again, slower but steadier now. Grace kept a photo of him beside the counter. Not as a saint, but as a reminder that people can come back from anything except the moment they stop trying. The locals who once crossed the street to avoid him now nodded when he passed. Redemption wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, earned one day at a time. Some evenings, Ethan visited the cemetery at the edge of town. The headstones faced the sea, the same sea that once swallowed his guilt. He knelt before his son's grave, fingers tracing the engraved name, whispering stories of the people he'd saved. He didn't ask for forgiveness anymore. He simply promised to live in a way that honored those who never got a second chance. The ocean wind carried his son's laughter in the rustle of the grass. Grace waited by the gate, her hand resting over her heart. Ethan turned toward her, eyes wet but peaceful. Some losses never fade. They become the compass that points you home. He walked toward her slowly, every step a quiet victory over the man he used to be. Redemption had come too late for some, but for the living it had arrived right on time.